Hello and good morning, everybody. I've had a lot of firsts in my 26 years on this planet. My first crush, my first kiss, and just last Wednesday, my first catfish. Yup, I got catfished. Now, technically, they were the same person from the profile. Let's just say it had been quite a few years since those photos were taken. And I don't want to simply hate on this lady. Breakfast was still enjoyable. But I did not recognize her when she walked through the restaurant doors. I only knew it was the same person because she looked at me and said my name, and she was the only person I was meeting that day. Of course, I did my best to be as polite as possible, enjoyed the meal, walked her out, wished her the best. But dang, 8 a.m. is too early for that. My first Hinge date ever. Onwards and upwards. As you may or may not know, I really do try my best to cover the lesser known, not world famous, and forgotten cases of the past. And to do so, I've really had to broaden my Google searches or find one author who leads me to another. But today, I simply scrolled through a list of countries and chose one I was completely unfamiliar with. Estonia. Today I bring you the ravaging ruble. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from Patch.com, Murderpedia, and Wikipedia. First off, this was a very difficult case to research, so I apologize for any of the gaps in the story. I just want to avoid any non-truths or inconsistencies as best that I can. For example, I don't know where half of the victims were exactly found, but you'll see what I mean in just a moment. Our story takes place in the capital of Estonia, the city of Tallinn. Tallinn. Situated on the Tallinn Bay of the Finland Gulf, the city has a long history. According to Britannica, there was a fortified settlement that existed there from the late 1st millennium BCE until the 10th to 11th century CE, and in 1219 it was captured by the Danes, who built a new fortress on Tumpea Hill. 100 or so years later, it was sold to the Teutonic Knights, and in 1561, it passed on to ownership of Sweden. Peter I, or the Great, captured the capital of Tallinn in 1710, and it remained a Russian city until it became the capital of independent Estonia from 1918 to 1940. From 41 to 44, German forces occupied the city and severely damaged many of the buildings. After the Supreme Soviet of Estonia declared independence in 1991, Tallinn became the official capital of the newly independent state. And let me tell you, the city is gorgeous. Many buildings from centuries ago still stand and create this otherworldly atmosphere of new and old. Just past those structures of art lies a beautiful and endless coastline. It's like 25 kilometers of coast or something. And I never would have known this if not for multiple people getting brutally attacked. On September 19th of 1997, 45-year-old man and paraplegic Tonu Pold was found murdered. Whether he was near his apartment, inside his apartment, or on a random sidewalk street, I do not know. None of my sources even mentioned how he had been killed, just that he was, quote, murdered. As I said, there is very little information about this case. All I can tell you is that it was rumored to have occurred around midnight. And I promise you that is the least covered single crime I will ever talk about. Police, like us, had absolutely nothing to go on. No witnesses, No murder weapon? Nada. On November 7th of 1997, the second victim in Tallinn was discovered. Alexei Pavlov was found bloodied on the lawn of an apartment building. Police found multiple stab wounds and later many broken bones. This time, thankfully, there was a bit more to the crime scene. Shattered glass was found around Pavlov's body, and 3 stories up, a broken window. Immediately, police gained entry and headed directly for the 3rd floor. The apartment belonged to Andrei Rubel, and inside, a mess. The stabbings had happened in the apartment, leaving blood smears everywhere, but the broken bones, as you may have guessed, came from the 3-story fall. Mr. Rubel, the only person home, was immediately arrested and subsequently sentenced to only 7 years in prison, a seemingly light sentence for murder of any kind. However, the troubles for the police were far from over, and they still had Mr. Pold's murder to solve. Thankfully, the 1997 holiday season came and went without any nasty deaths. But then on the morning of January 23rd or 24th, the body of a houseless man named Yevgeny Shelest was found murdered on the sands of Strumy Beach. He had been stabbed several times with a knife that the killer had taken with them. In a very public area found at sunup, it was assumed by investigators that this man had also been killed under the cover of dark. Besides a bloody mess, the killer hadn't left a single clue as to who they might be, where they were headed, or even why they chose the victim they did. Only days later, on February 2nd, another man was found murdered in the city of Tallinn. Vladimir Ivanov, a 44-year-old man, is found decapitated on the street. Again, found early in the morning, no witnesses, no evidence left behind, and no murder weapon. 2 unsolved murders, both vulnerable men stabbed to death, and now investigators have another victim, but he had been decapitated? It didn't make any sense. Exactly 1 week later, on February 9th, 1998, a 54-year-old woman by the name of Olga Vorenkova was found beaten to death in her own apartment. Yet again, little to no clues were left behind. However, one teensy tiny little detail was staring police directly in the face. The apartment where Olga lived and died just so happens to be the same apartment complex where a year and a half ago, Alexei Pavlov was stabbed 4 times and thrown from a 3rd-floor window. But Andrei Rubel was still behind bars. Was it simply that crazy of a coincidence? Surely the MO is completely different and the victim profile almost opposite. But for the first time in 2 years, the investigators began questioning whether these murders are connected, not just random acts of horror spread across the city of Tallinn. The same month, a 54-year-old Vladimir Kinzersky goes missing, and with enough on their plates already, police were spread far too thin for a well-executed missing persons case. Besides his disappearance, the spring of 1998 remained somewhat calm and peaceful, relatively speaking. The city of Tallinn was able to catch its breath, hoping that the madness had finally found its conclusion. The sad truth, as we all know, these people won't stop unless they are stopped. And on June 4th, a house nurse heard the scream of 15-year-old Alice Sivas and rushed to her room down the hall. To her horror, Alice's throat had been slashed, blood uncontrollably gurgling from her neck. The nurse tried in vain to save the poor girl's life, but sadly, the wound had done far too much damage. The killer hadn't left any physical evidence behind, but he had shown far too much already. Alice's parents informed police that their daughter had been getting harassed frequently over the past year. She had told them about this guy who wouldn't leave her alone, and the parents knew it had to have been him. Thankfully, they even knew his name. Alexander Rubel. That name should sound eerily familiar. Son of convicted killer Andrei Rubel, as mentioned above, Alexander Rubel was quickly picked up by police and brought into the station for questioning. To everyone's shock, his mouth opened and confessions flew out like butterflies. He admitted to every single murder I talked about. Every single one. He told police that he started huffing gas a few years back, and ever since, he's been on this killing rampage. As in the case of the first murder, the paraplegic, he said he chose him as the path of least resistance, the easiest target that he could find. Quote, on November 7th, 1997, Rubel's second victim was stabbed by his father first, Andrei Rubel, 4 times. According to his testimony, Andrei had thought Pavlov had been courting his wife. Subsequent to the stabbing, Alexander helped Pavlov into an empty room where he strangled him and then threw him out of a 3rd-floor window. End quote. Just a little father-son bonding. Now we know that his father took the full blame initially as to let his son go free, aka get away with murder. As for his third victim, Yevgeny, he never really gave a reason, so I'm assuming he just needed to scratch that nasty itch. Olga, the woman beaten to death in her own apartment, and Vladimir, who had been decapitated, were both murdered when they refused to give Alexander money. Vladimir Kinzirsky, the missing man, turns out he had been lured into Rubel's home and killed for seemingly no reason. As for Alice, she had been brave enough to turn down all of Alexander's sexual advances, and for that, he ruthlessly killed her. The police finally had their killer. Only problem, Alexander Rubel was 17. Here in America, we see teens charged as adults all the time, even as early as 14 or 15. Not in Estonia, not in 1998. The longest sentence he could legally serve, 8 years. People choose to go to school for longer than 8 years. A horrible ruling. Quote, at his trial, Alexander Rubel admitted that he had huffed gasoline before committing the murders. Being a juvenile, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison, the maximum allowed by Estonian law. At the end of his sentence, everyone begged the government to keep Alexander behind bars. Professionals who had dealt with the serial killer said he was absolutely not rehabilitated, and the chances he'd reoffend were outrageously high. But the law is the law, and in June of 2006, Alexander was released. He reportedly lives free today in Ukraine, end quote. He hasn't been in the news since, but that doesn't mean he hasn't killed again. I don't want to throw accusations out there about this guy, but maybe he just got better at the thing he loved doing. And that, my friends, is the story of Alexander Rubel, the homicide huffer. Thank you all again from the bottom of my heart for listening in today. I truly can't thank you enough. And stick around for a bit more, extra more after the music. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Well. Hello. I don't know about y'all, but here in New England, we just got slammed with snow. Like 12 to 14 inches. Some places got much more. I love it. Only because it's still warm and I know it'll melt by the end of the week. But yeah, I walked to work the past 2 days as my car was not going anywhere. Anywho, today's bonus story was a listener's recommendation. I would never find these stories if not for y'all. Thank you. Thank you, Liv. Titled, Courts Commit Woodbury Man Who Wanted to Be a Serial Killer to a Mental Hospital. Written by Chris J. of Patch.com. Quote, a would-be serial killer from Woodbury, Minnesota was committed to a mental hospital after a Washington County District Court judge deemed he was a danger to himself and the public. Mr. Buscal, 21, was convicted of stalking and harassment in 2008 and watched closely by authorities after they learned of his elaborate plan to break into a stranger's home and murder him. Following a 3-day trial, Washington County District Court ordered Buscal to be confined at the Minnesota Security Hospital in St. Peter. Court records indicate that Buscal was partially inspired by the TV show Dexter, a program about a serial killer who targets those who have escaped the law. I'm sure you're all familiar with. But when he couldn't find a potential victim who fit that description, he chose someone else and was caught by police. Buscal's ongoing behavior both before he was convicted and later while on probation clearly demonstrate that he poses a significant risk to the community's safety. Rather than wait until he acts out his criminal obsessions, we sought to have him civilly committed as mentally ill and dangerous to protect society and also to assure that he receives the psychiatric help that he needs. When he was arrested on the stalking charges, police found a murder kit and detailed plans to break into a Woodbury man's home, slit his throat, and stab him to death. The murder kit itself included a swim cap, hospital scrubs, a mask, surgical gloves, tools, plastic bags, shoe covers, several knives, a scalpel, details about the target, and a bunch of other bizarre items. He was also found to have authored a document he entitled My Life as a Serial Killer. Buscal violated several conditions of his probation, including possessing knives and using marijuana. Straight to jail. Later, probation officials discovered another 8-inch knife in Buscal's desk at school, along with a night vision scope and another knife in his home. His computer showed hundreds of searches about serial killers and their victims. I mean, so does mine. According to court records, Buscal was beset by thoughts of murder and fantasized about being a serial killer. He planned to cut off his victims' eyelids or cut out his or her heart as part of a plan to sensationalize the murder. He even told a psychiatrist that he thought part of the public would be, quote, on his side. In April, Buscal tried to get a job at Cutco, a company that sells knives, and later admitted to a therapist that he was thinking of killing a Woodbury couple. Quote, the substantial likelihood that Mr. Buscal poses a risk of future danger to our community led us to seek his civil commitment, and we hope that he receives proper psychiatric treatment. End quote. Wow, wooey. What's going on over there in Minnesota? Whoa, glad I have zero connection to that place. What? Well, that is all I have for you wonderful folks today. I know it was a bit shorter one, but please keep sending suggestions. I love to hear them. Would never have heard that story about somewhere only 2 hours from where I grew up, if not for y'all. So, have a wonderful, wonderful week, and I will see you on Thursday. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Yeah, good enough for who it's for.